I call this meeting to order. The first order of business is discussion of the Mark T. Sheehan tract. This is an item that Mr. Ross, the vice chairperson of this committee, requested be on this agenda, so perhaps he might give us a little background.
Okay, I'd like to thank Mr. Reynolds, first of all, for his help in this. Mr. Reynolds and I took a walk on the track about 2.5 weeks ago, and the track itself is not in bad condition, but the problem is the lines on the track. They've reached the point now where I don't see how we can run a meet. The finish line and start and finish line is gone, and the staggered start lines, which is where the 1,200 and the 1,800 meter races start, they're almost non-existent. Also on the other side of the track, there are lines missing. Some of the lines where we set the hurdles are no longer visible. And I don't see how we can host a track meet. I could see an event where a state record might be at risk and somebody didn't start on the right line. They could be a foot or two off. And I don't think we need a new track in there, but I do think we need some maintenance, some paint done to it. It's just horrible. And the other part of the problem is I've noticed that the rubber mats we put down for the people to walk across aren't the right mats. They're just a rubber mat, and that's eating the paint. That's reacting to the paint. Lyman Hall has the new things they put down on it, and I think maybe we should take a look at those.
Okay, I've just to give you a heads up, in the interim, until the track is rebuilt, because it does need to be recoated, my staff will mark those lines, those marks that you were talking about that have faded away. At least that it gives us a little bit more time. The track does need to be recoated. It's way past due, and it's had several repairs, and there's been no recoating after those repairs. So we're in a situation where eventually we'll start to get water underneath the track, and we'll destroy it eventually. So that does need to happen. Obviously, there's other concerns down there. The curb has completely failed, and the only way you're going to replace that is to either excavate on the track side or the field side. Normally, it's done from the field side. They should be able to continue using it. We won't be marking the lanes. That's way too big of a project. I have one paint machine. But those marks for the starts and the stops and the hurdles, I talked to my staff, and they are going to try to address that, even though that is not something that we would normally do in-house. It's special paint. It goes with the material that the track's made out of, but we should be able to purchase it. So sometime this fall, probably the beginning of October, my staff will make those repairs.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a quick question on where the tree fell, and I know this is not the Sheehan track, where the tree fell on the track at Lyman Hall. Have they come in to fix that yet?
I don't believe they have, but the purchase order's been issued and they made a commitment, so you should see it probably next week, I would think. Obviously, this week it can't happen with these weather conditions.
Yeah, because my concern there is that if we wait till winter and water gets under the track, it's gonna.
Yeah, no, it's
cause
unfortunately the company has been pretty non-responsive since it happened, and we finally got a commitment from them. And thanks to Bev Summers in my office, she has called them every week, and we finally will have them out there. Wasn't even the expense isn't even that great. It's under $7,000.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Mr. Reynolds?
Yeah, I think Mark was alluding to, if you go out to the track, there is a concrete, I don't know if we want to call it an apron or whatever, separating the football field from the track. And it's supposed to be ground level, but there's sections, of multiple feet long where the concrete over the years, I guess, has been eroded or weathered. And there's indentations, and I think Mr. Ross said that prior to some of the meets, the students will go out and pull up pieces of concrete. So we had talked about that too, is that the one where you said you would have to excavate?
That's correct.
Yeah.
The only way to replace that curb is to excavate, because what you don't see is that curb
Yeah.
is actually the same height as
Exactly.
a curb you'd find on a sidewalk in a street.
Because I think we talked to you could probably do maybe a quick patch on it, but how long is that gonna last? Right?
It's nothing that could have any kind of a guarantee.
Yeah.
It might last a month, you might get 2 years out of it.
Kathy? Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Purcell?
Just a, am I on? Okay. Just a quick question, remind me, because you might have already done all this in the strategic plan, but is there a plan for recoding or fixing the curb or anything, or is that?
We have pricing to replace the field with a new field, replace the curb, and refinish the track.
Okay.
That was hopefully going
That
to
was the
be a
whole- the
complete
whole thing,
package,
though. Okay.
yes.
Okay. Mrs. Costello? Okay.
Just to, if, each year when we meet with the mayor, which we'll be doing probably, we usually do it middle of October, we bring up different capital projects, and we did bring that up last year. The mayor did not see that that was one that he wanted to move forward at that time.
And maybe just, not to usurp you, Kathy, but, you know, well,
I'm kidding, go ahead.
well, it's based on, I believe it was based on the longevity of
Correct.
what he perceives as the longevity of the project, because he's looking for. I
Well,
think-
because usually it's 20 years he's looking
Yeah.
for, and this track obviously didn't last 20
Right.
years,
No,
nor did the
that's
field.
all
So
right.
that's the concern. So we have to continue to monitor that and figure out what our next steps are. And we might have some alternatives that we can consider as we move through this fall. But at this point, we'll still bring it forward to the mayor for consideration.
Mrs. Costelli?
Okay, so I just want to make two comments. One is just to keep in mind that because we fought very hard to convert the Lyman Hall track from a 6-lane track to an 8-lane track, it now qualifies for state events. So worst case scenario, instead of always having the state events at Sheehan, they could be at Lyman Hall if it turns out that it becomes too prohibitive to fix the track right now. Because the other point I want to remind everybody of is we have a facility study that has just come out, and it could very well be, based on that facility study, that an expense such as the track replacement may not be something that we would want to do, depending on what the facility study shows.
Further comments on this agenda item? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3, Alice Training Board of Education members.
Yes, we just wanted to give you an update on this. We had sent you out a lot of communications about the ALICE training, and I do want to compliment Danielle Belizzi, our Assistant Superintendent for Personnel, and also David Bryant for their collaboration with all of our administrators. We had 15 people trained in the district. The training occurred over the summer for those individuals who then facilitated training for our teachers on the first day back. Since then, the teachers on the Friday of the first week, when we had the professional development day, they did the online training, which is an hour. We have set up training for central office and other staff, such as food services and staff that were not trained on the first in the first session. So we just wanted to give you that heads up. We also plan to train and work with our YMCA staff that are in our buildings, because they are there before school, after school, and we also are going to offer our services to Holy Trinity to give them support in that area as a good neighbor, to give them that opportunity. We did get a phone call, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to put this on the agenda, is that we did get a phone call from a parent asking if we were going to train parents. And that's not the premise of ALICE. It's an in-school opportunity. So I just wanted to say that it's not that we don't want to, it's just that that's not the training's purpose. It's for in-school opportunities. So in terms of ALICE, one of the other parts of ALICE, which I wanted to share, because it ties directly into our bid waiver that we're going to be going for on Wednesday, is that in the ALICE training, it talks about having staff members who, if in the event of a lockdown scenario, be able to access the intercom system to give direct information as to where potentially the person may be. In lieu of that, because that often there's some contradiction in terms of potentially ALICE versus what our police officers might want. We do have a technology, which you're all aware of because I've sent out numerous pieces of information to all of you, that we are going forward, which will allow us to have the same impact, but in a different way, and it's called the Silox class system. And what it does, it gives all of our staff members, first of all, a panic button in their hands, but secondly, it allows direct communication with classrooms from Command Central. So as if a panic button is pushed in the school system, the system locks in, and it tells you exactly, it tells the police department, whoever has first responder access, exactly where the impact is in the building. So it color codes the heat map of the building, and then it allows to push out messages to individual staff members where they are in an efficient manner and a less maybe disruptive manner to what the police and paramedics may need to do. So I just wanted to share that because I know that it is a recommended element of ALICE training, and we have shared this information with our administrators. They're very supportive of the Silox. We shared with our first our safety committee, and then we had a presentation, and so we're moving forward with that. So the goal is on Wednesday night at the town council meeting, we're seeking approval for a bid waiver because it is a one-of-the-kind system. There are no other software systems like this at this time. So we're looking to have that be our purchase at this point. So we don't need to go out to bid, or we're requesting not to go out to bid because there is no other product that does what this product does. So we'll be looking to do that. As of right now, the estimates we're receiving for the cost of that product are below what we put aside in our 1% account this year for hardwired panic buttons. So in reality, there's also potentially a savings, but more importantly, it is much more proactive and progressive, and it doesn't have to be just used for lockdowns. It could be used for medical alerts. If a teacher has a child who's having a medical problem, they could press their computer and it'll go right to the nurse. The nurse will know what the situation is and be able to get to the classroom in a proactive manner. Also could use for fire drills, a variety of different things. So it's not just a single-use software, which a lot of them are. And there's what the police department and fire department, who have been part of this process all along the way, are really impressed by the documentation that the system provides. So in any incident, it gives us documentation of exactly what occurred, where it occurred, and then how was it responded to. So I just wanted to give you those pieces.
Mrs. McKay?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back, thank you for all that, Dr. Menzo. I just wanted to go back to the ALICE training. I'm not sure if I heard it correctly. So is this a multi-step training? Like you phase it? Is there phase?
Well,
I don't know what's
the
right
training
way.
is complete. There are two parts to
Okay.
the training. The first is a 4-hour training, in-person
Okay.
training, where that was done the first day of PD.
Right,
And then the following Friday, there's a follow-up online 1 hour
okay,
that they have to do, each staff member has to do, and they print out a certificate.
okay.
that
And
they
that's been
completed.
complete. So
Completed.
the staff that you had planned to train in ALICE have been trained, and you're done for the year unless you had new hires?
Yeah,
or-
and now we're looking at new hires. We're looking at, central office, ancillary staff
Gotcha.
that were outside. But that's why we closed the buildings that day. It was so important to have the offices closed that day because clerical needed to have the training with the staff in the school.
Thank you.
Mrs. Castelli?
So, Dr. Menzo, the company that makes this Silox product, do they make other things as well? Or is this a,
They make a variety of different security components, but this is really their proprietary software that they have. That this is something that they've based their new business on. The woman who designed it, we actually had a couple conference calls with her. Extremely, it's interesting because we use design thinking in our district, and she totally used that whole model, looking at true empathy for educators as well as students and administrators in a situation of an emergency nature. So she really has meticulously addressed this. It's being implemented in the South and in the Midwest. We'd be the first district in the Northeast to be implementing this. And we were very fortunate because we have a collaborative opportunity with the company that is the sole source vendor in the Northeast. So we are, without going into great detail, we are definitely benefiting from that relationship in terms of some discounts and donations.
All right, so my concern is this a startup company that could potentially be, go out of business in a year, and then we're stuck with this software?
No,
that-
there's a history with the company, and it's a system that is relatively easy to maintain also, which that's why it was very smart the way they did it. It's a web-based system, and so it comes out to approximately $4,000 a year for annual maintenance, which is very reasonable when you're going across multiple locations. We're going across obviously 12 locations. But no, we're confident. They have the seal of approval from many large organizations in the United States, as well as the U.S. Department of Defense.
Okay, thanks.
Mrs. Purcell?
This is just like a quick question. You said everyone has one in their hand. What is
Well, what
they
it is
use?
it's web-based. So every teacher is issued a school-issued computer
Okay.
or a laptop, or a tablet. So that's really where the teacher would have access to it in their classroom.
Okay,
so-
so internet has to be up.
Yep.
Okay.
Further discussion on this agenda item? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Item 4, graduation requirements. This was an item that started out being discussed in instructional committee, but because we didn't have the full complement of board members present at that time, it was deemed that perhaps we could continue the discussion at this meeting.
Well, actually, yes, that's true. I'm going to give you a quick little summary of what we discussed last time. I have a handout for you that has a chart with what Wallingford Public Schools requires as minimum graduation requirements, what the state guidelines are currently, what state guidelines are in store for us with the graduating class of 2023, which is next year's freshman class, and then a sampling of the DIRG, what they require now. And I will share this document with you electronically as well, so that you can click on the links to kind of see their full graduation requirement policy. And so last week, this was broached in conversation as it related to our current requirement of 2 credits for physical education, and the potential of adding credits as a requirement for world language. And as we started to embark on that conversation, a public act was passed at the end of May in 2017 that amended current state statute as it relates to graduation requirements. That changes many of them with the graduating class of 2023, which takes out a lot of the specificity that are currently in the guidelines related to English and math, and generalizes it to 9 credits in humanities, 9 credits in science, technology, engineering, and math, and so forth. And so while we are investigating some of that that vagueness in the new policy to ensure that we are appropriately planning for our program moving forward, we are at the juncture where, with our incoming freshman class, we do need to have outlined in our program of studies for next year changes that reflect being in alignment with how the state statute was amended with this public act. So what I would like to do is pass out my handout to all of you, give you some time to review the changes that are in effect for next year's freshman class. And then in potentially Dr. Menzo's Friday message to all of you, we can, and I'll share it electronically as well, put in a link for you to start listing what your questions are moving forward. That way, as we continue to put this on instructional agendas, you all have had the opportunity to ask your questions. I can actually have solid, specific answers for you as we're talking about it. And that's not to say more questions won't come up as we talk, but the more information I have ahead of time with what you're thinking and feeling, what your questions and concerns are, we can appropriately plan, because we don't need to make a decision this month or even next month. We start our program of study planning in November for printing and distribution to students after the holidays in December. So we're planning ahead of time. I'd like to continue the conversation at each instructional meeting, but I wanted you to at least all have a sense of what are some of these schools in the DIRG doing currently, and what other questions you may have moving forward. So as we change and adjust our policy to fit the amendments made, we have all the same information at the same time. Does that make sense?
Mrs.
Great.
McKay?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that as any policy enhancements, changes, add-ons, that requires us, as we all know, 3 reviews. So those timelines actually become rather tight if you're looking for December, January-ish. You know, and I appreciate the need to have the time to get for the, you know, high school level to get the course selection out there, but we actually really don't have a lot of time if you think about that 3-time review policy. So I'm just concerned about that. If we, you know, if we do make changes, I want to make it work for
But
you
we
guys.
do have to, no matter what, we have to make changes.
Right.
Because the way our current structure is, does not meet the amendments that
Good.
have been passed the end of May of 2017.
So, based on that, when would we have to have our first, I guess, you know, approval or review by? Do we know that? Do we have an etched-in date? I don't mean to
I think the
put our backs up
the
against the
first
wall.
draft we would definitely need to have by the November instructional committee meeting.
Okay,
So we could do it November instructional, we could do November operations, you know, we could, because if we had to come back and revise and then go to the board meeting in November and then still have to, you know, you still have to have another reading there,
right.
but that would get us.
And I mean, in theory, we could add meetings if need be.
But
I mean, if it.
I think if we act proactively, like
That's
we're-
that's why I just wanted to get some definition to that.
And the thing that was brought up at last time, and I brought it up, was the fact that obviously we know that there's going to be change in leadership at the state as well as at the
Right.
State Department of Education come January. However, it is not within our best interests on the behalf of the students to hold off until that point because
Right.
though I've already set up courses, we can't. And by the time, to be honest, no legislative change is going to be made until probably the spring. So the thing is that in the past, and I did a whole chronology of how this has occurred, in the past, they have made changes on a frequent basis. This year, with the exception of one other 2-year span back in, I think it was 13, 14, 14, 15, around that period, this past year, 17, 18, and 18, 19, they didn't make any changes to their recommendation. They moved it forward. So the language of the statute says that between the classes of 2000, I believe 2004 to 2022, we're still situated with those guidelines. So that's what's in your chart. And then it says from 23 on, and again, nothing that was, they started in 2017 with those, July 1st, and then 2018, there were no changes. So I just want to, we can't wait, unfortunately. If they get taken away, then we could go back and we could look at those again after that happens. But we run the risk of, again, not being prepared as we move forward.
Other remarks on this agenda item? Mrs. Raccio?
I know one of the things that is in the new legislation talks about mastery as opposed to the capstone. Has that been brought in front of leadership so they've had, the leadership committee, so they've had their impact with mastery-based learning moving forward?
No, not yet, because in all honesty, there is no great description as to what that looks like. So that's part of kind of the fact-finding that we talked about last week. There are certain components of the new amendments that require a little bit of digging into to make sure that what our thinking is aligned with what the amendment is. So that is one of them. Moving forward to ensure that, what we're doing now fits under that, or what are some of our other options as well. So that's kind of part of my list of questions that I need to seek out answers to.
What we have seen, and you'll see at least in one of the districts in our DIRC, people are still equating that statement to capstone,
Correct.
but there are other options. But we just have to clarify.
It's not as rigid as capstone.
No, we have to really clarify it. And again, like we talked about last week, we had a great conversation because some of these things are more broad in nature. That's actually a good thing because it might help us with some of our ag science courses, some of our other courses. But we've knocked on the door. We're waiting for clarification and seeing where that lies.
Mrs. Purcell?
Is any of this, are we on?
Yeah, I
Is
think
any of
you're-
this
you're-
tied to funding? Because I thought at one point that this was tied to funding, and that's kind of where things kind of stopped.
It's always been tied to funding, not necessarily that the state was going to give more funding or
Right.
that the state was even going to reduce funding. It was tied to the fact that many districts felt that they could not meet the requirements. That came up when it came to world language. It came up to a lot of different areas. Again, this is the only time during the last 10 years now, almost 10 years, that
Yeah.
they did not make an adjustment, a substantive adjustment this past session. So that was kind of interesting. And again, it might be just wait and see because there's new leadership change. I can't answer that. None of us can.
I was going to say it's more than 10, because I know I gave testimony in 2004, 5, and 6 on
Yeah.
the same bill. and
Well,
it's-
yeah, that's
keeps
so
changing.
exactly. It
Yeah.
kept changing, but the first major change was I think they changed it in 2009, and based on at that point it was the end of year assessments, if you remember, the end of course assessments. There were a lot of different levels of assessments that were put in place, and that was the two. Yeah, that was removed, and there was a variety of things. But yeah, the bill itself, there was a revision in 11, 13, 14, 15, 16.
Further discussion or comment? All right, so we look forward to seeing that. Okay. And then, please do give feedback so that we have
Yes,
this information.
Actually, do you want feedback,
Yeah,
by a particular date or time?
We'll put that in my memo
You'll
Friday.
get that out? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Carrie and I will work on that.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right, that will be very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
Any other comment on this agenda item?
Yeah,
Mr. Ross?
where the state requires a smaller amount than we require, we can still maintain what we have, is that correct?
Yes, as I said last time, and I think it's important that we have to decide what's best for Wallingford. And state is a minimum. It's not the what we have to accept. We could go above that, which we have done already.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries.
Mrs. McKay?
Yeah, I'm just looking at this chart quickly. For
Yep.
graduation requirements, your first column is current.
Current.
Is
That's
Current
that
Wallingford.
current for
Public
us?
schools.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yep.
that's not current state.
The next one,
Thank
new
you.
state guidelines, is what
Probably
we're
should have
functioning
called
under
that
right
out.
now through the graduating class of 2022. Future is the amendment that was passed the end of May 2017 that impacts our incoming next year's freshman class. And then the last column is a sampling, not exhaustive, of the DIRG.
So I just want to make sure I understand this right. Wait, what's future versus new state guidelines?
The new state guidelines are through 2022. So our graduating
Right.
class of 2022.
For where? That state?
That's
okay.
right now, yep.
First,
And then the
Well-
future is what was just passed the end of May 2017.
okay, so when you say new state guidelines, but isn't that, I don't
It's
mean to get
current.
caught up in
It's current.
semantics, but
But
that
we
to
are.
me,
So in the first column, it's just think Wallingford,
okay, right, and then.
which should coordinate with the
That's
second
fine.
column.
Right. So-
Future is
so-
what changes.
So wait, new state guidelines is really existing state guidelines?
Correct.
Okay, so that's existing state guidelines, and then future is future state guidelines.
Right.
Thank
Next
you.
year's incoming freshmen.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any other remarks or discussion?
I don't know.
No? Not sure, or
I don't know, just give me a second to look it over.
take a,
And we're going to get this, obviously, you said also.
Electronically, yeah.
Electronically.
So you
but
can click
just
on
to-
it.
Okay.
right, it's, Mrs. Purcell?
The other question I have, and I guess we can get this as we go through conversations, but how Ray had said, we do a little bit more in certain areas, where we can get information to show the need. Like, for instance, we already know the health survey showed us about the physical activity and stuff like that. But I mean, any areas of need for like math or whatever, we will be able to get that information too, in case we want to go
We'll
above.
also include in many of the links, you'll see as part of policy what each DIRG's course load requirement is.
Right.
That's their local requirement. Some are 7 credits, a semester, 7 credits a year. Ours is 6.5 credits a year. Everybody is a little bit different, and you can have more, and you can specify between the state requirement, what the local requirement is. You can specify what that encompasses, or you can leave it open to just pure electives.
Okay, well, the reason I'm asking, I mean, I understand the comparison with the DIRGs, but I want to make sure it's personalized for our district.
Yep, understood.
Mrs. Corso?
So one of the things that I'm really concerned about in the future guidelines is that the state neglects business and career departments, our CTE departments. I don't want to leave them out. So I think that's an area we really need to look at. I think it's important for
What
our
was it
students.
again? Business?
There's
Business and
no
career.
business or career type requirement for our students coming down from the state in the new guidelines.
Got it.
And that's leaving a really large part of our students out. And I'm not sure
Well,
if we can be creative with math, and math counts as personal finance or
Yeah,
accounting or
I
this
think,
and that,
I
but
agree with you, Aaron.
I
and-
don't want to leave them out.
No, I won't get on my soapbox with the state, but it makes no sense to leave those out. In a state that is losing employees by the moment, we probably just during this meeting had 5 people put up their houses for sale to move south with their with a company that's leaving the state of Connecticut. It is so short-sighted to not have any requirements in that area. So I think we need to, personally, I'd be advocating with you on that, that we need to include that. Because if we're going to work collaboratively with our own community, never mind larger Connecticut community, but just keep businesses in Wallingford, we have to have students, no matter if they're college bound or not, be thinking in that mindset. And so I think that's the challenge with these buckets. I think the buckets they created are interesting, but, and I'm not one that I want more guidance, but I also don't, I feel almost frightened for some communities who don't have the ability to pay sometimes, so they might just see this as a permission to cut those programs. And again, it's not my worry, because I work here in Wallingford where I know we're going to do the right thing. But I do hear what you're saying. I support that 100%.
I think one of the important things to get the guidance that we're looking for is how do they classify, by example, the science, technology, engineering, and math, what falls under those, specifically? What's a range that they deem acceptable, so that as we look at our course catalog and we look at what we want for our students of Wallingford, we know at least where the pockets fit under humanities, under science, math, technology, and engineering, and so forth, so that we can provide clear guidance to the policy committee to really ensure that we've hit every area that we want to hit.
Mrs. McKay?
Yeah, so that's kind of following up, and I'm not an educator, so thank you for raising that, Aaron. So when I look at this, I'm assuming to go from existing to future, English, social studies fit under humanities,
Correct.
where math and science fit under the science, and yet they're still, they're increasing, but it doesn't, the mapping over is, I totally appreciate that. As a non-educator, I'm looking at this saying, these almost seem too broad, those future, and that's a little scary, so. You can connect some of the dots, but what if you don't? Yeah, that is interesting.
Mrs. Purcell?
So you're going to provide us with the detail under each of these categories?
As soon as I get
As
the
soon as we
details,
get
yes.
it, we will be
So you
happy.
mean they made these categories without actually saying what would constitute a humanity, or what would constitute a science, technology, engineering, or math?
Right, they're very broad at this time.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
there's-
just trying to get some guidance from places like CABE and our attorneys and otherwise, to ensure that we're reading it and interpreting it in the manner that it should
And
be.
the State Department has to offer us guidance
I mean,
too,
it is so scary to think about that this, I mean, recognizing that the changes for graduating class that are coming in next fall,
I think unfortunately, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No,
Unfortunately,
that's-
I think that because, like, as I read off the year after year after year that it was extended, I think
yeah.
almost it's become to it's come to a point where I think a lot of my colleagues, they just don't necessarily, we don't all think it's going to happen.
I understand.
So, I think that's unfortunate, but the rubber hits the road this year. We never, in going through, and I have the chronology on a whiteboard in my office because I wanted to double check it, there was never a year where we were in the fall and had to make a decision for the following year. We never got to that point with legislation. We were always a year removed.
Yeah.
So by the time we had to get to this point, it already had been moved out another year.
Yep.
So this is the first time, and I don't, that's why we need clarification also from the State Department. And while it's great to have the liberty,
Right.
there's
So
cautionary tale.
I'm wondering, do we need almost another column? Because the way we currently operate, if you look at our current Wallingford, all these categories don't exist, obviously, going to the future. We almost need a category of, I understand, if we interpret to the best of our ability what each of these buckets for the future state guidelines represent, we kind of almost need a column as far as where are we
Going to end up, correct?
going to end up in
Correct.
relation to that future. So I could make some assumptions, what I think humanities cover, and I can make some assumptions about the STEM, but that may not be your assumptions in, I almost think we need a fifth column for that.
Correct.
Maybe, I don't know. If I'm-
No,
am I the
that
only
was,
one?
and actually, that's what we mentioned last week, that there was going to be a blank column. This is just to give you the data
Yep.
first.
Yep, I
And then we're
appreciate
going
that.
to give in a blank column to
Yeah.
kind of
I just wanna
formulate
make-
what Wallingford Public Schools was going to require.
Right, and I just don't want to leave it open that we're all talking the same talk without actually
Well, and
making
again,
sure we're
there's
talking
this
the same talk.
conversation, and I think that's why, getting the questions first. But we want to also, and this goes to Aaron's point, we want to tie this to our pathways
Yep.
and our career clusters, because you really want to see that connection. We want to start building that, and we're working on another document to actually start showing that for kindergarten parents, to show those connections when we do a career fair at 3rd through 5th grade, to have the students start thinking about what courses do we offer in those careers that they're seeing at the career day. So they don't just see, these great careers, which is excellent, but when you get to middle school, you might want to take this, or when you get to high school, you want to take this. So it's never too early to start. So that's where we also have to embed those because we have the 4 real pathways, so we have to look at those and embed those within this document too.
Other comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is item 5A, the Operation Committee meeting minutes for the June 11, 2018 meeting. I do have a couple of clerical corrections, which I will give to Mr. Barone, and he can make those corrections with our individual that does that. They were on pages 2 and 3. One of them indicates that, especially the one on page 3, the encore offerings at the middle school. It begins, "We have found 2 great candidates and are proposing they be placed at Dag Hammarskjöld Middle Schools." We only have one Dag Hammarskjöld Middle School, so we're going to make that singular. And then, just to clarify, which is the feeder school to Lyman Hall. And the other one is a very minor clerical issue. So unless there are other corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, we'll take consensus with corrections. Mr. Ross?
I wasn't here, so I'll abstain.
Okay?
Yes.
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 I wasn't here either, abstain.
Yes.
And yes. Okay. We have that? Thank you. All right, moving on to 5B, the Board of Education Financial Report for June 2018. Mr. Barone?
Hi, so we have the summary of last year handed out. We are expecting a surplus of about $753,000. I broke it out based on our normal categories, and I was just gonna touch on a couple of the items. The tuition, that surplus was reduced because from the initial, or the several of the projections, because the excess cost grant was significantly higher than we had anticipated at the beginning of the year. So that's why that number went down. The other account and the plan accounts, we did a lot of strategic plan purchasing items that you folks approved at various meetings, and that's why those accounts went into deficit, based on the surplus we had projected. And then we also were awarded a grant about 2 weeks ago for about $53,000 related to impact aid for displaced students. And we were awarded the grant, and it has to be spent towards last year, so we're gonna credit that back to the last fiscal year based on the guidelines related to the grant.
How much was the grant?
53,000 and some change. Okay, and then that number, that grant is not posted in Munis, so you may notice a difference between the Munis balance and the Excel spreadsheet. It's because we haven't updated Munis for the grant yet. We were at a unique timing where we didn't want to change Munis because we were filing some state reports, and we thought if we changed it, we would have, it would cause a reconciliation issue between the systems. So we filed the reports, and we're going to revise them based on the grant. It came literally the day before our biggest report was due. I think, that's it. We're pretty much, we are still paying off some bills from last year, but this is the target, and this is about where we're gonna end for the year. At the next meeting, we'll talk about how we're, the strategic plan and how we're gonna allocate towards the 1% fund.
Mrs. McKay?
Thanks. I know you explained it, but I'm not sure I got it. For other accounts, could we go over that again, the jump?
Basically, that is all the items that you had approved prior to June 30th.
Right.
Those went into those other accounts. So that's
Okay.
where that's why it wasn't allocated at the beginning of the year.
Right.
So
It
we went
wouldn't
over
be.
budget.
It wouldn't.
Exactly.
I mean, those were,
So it balances, but we just wanted to be true that
Yep.
those came from those other accounts.
okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Corso?
I just want to clarify the 1% account. We have an existing 1% account.
We have several existing because
We have
each year.
several
Every year.
existing.
Because every year
Each
there's a
year
new
we
one.
have.
Yep.
And then ultimately, this additional 700,000 would also go into a 1%?
Correct. What we would do is we would determine how we want to allocate it. The board would approve that, then we would go to town council, and they would authorize us to roll it into the 1% account.
So last year, we had the $770,000, it was approximately, I think, around that for special ed. So
Right.
we allocated, that's still there, allocated for that particular item. That could change if we chose to do so in the future. Prior to that, we have a few accounts that are just being continued to be drawn down because of bid processes and such like that. So yeah, every year, but we have to tell the town council, we have to give them line item ideas as to how we're going to where we're going to place the money and how we're going to use it.
And that does not expire. The operating budget, we get the budget for the year, and then, either we spend it, we return it to the town, or we roll it into the 1% account. The 1% account, once it's in there, it stays there till we utilize it.
So
So you basically have a 1% account for each year, right?
Correct,
Is that,
correct.
so do you try to, because I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I understand why you need to do it that way. So do you try, you try to exhaust your
Correct.
latest, or earliest 1%? And so
we-
you probably have managing at any given time, maybe 4, 5, 1%
Correct.
accounts? Is that not hold you to a number, but.
No, it's true.
Am I
and
understanding that correctly?
I don't think we have, I mean,
whatever number,
we have
3.
multiple open, of
Yeah,
course.
right.
What we've done in the past prior to Dominic coming on board is that we've gone to the town and we've reallocated if we found
Yeah, that was my next question.
If there were, say, for example, a vehicle that we were going to purchase for maintenance.
Yeah.
And it came in under bid, then we were able to go back to the town and reallocate that. That's how we moved, and we were able to get some of the technology.
Gotcha.
So we were able to move some of those things forward. So we do have it. There's an annual opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
And that's what we take advantage of, working, very closely with the town in the sense that we take advantage of that timeline to make those adjustments.
Yeah. And it wouldn't be appropriate, you really do want to keep them siloed. You don't ever want to, any of those 1% accounts, combine them. That each year needs to
Well,
be.
technically,
They have to
I
be by
don't
law?
believe statutorily you can, because it can't be more than 1% of the allocated funds from that year.
True.
So amassed of crossed accounts, you could. So like, say, for example, just throwing something
Yep.
out there, that you want to do a capital project.
Yep.
And we find that the last 2 years, we haven't, we've used as much as the 1% as we can, but we were very fortunate, bids came back. So one year
Right.
you have 300,000, the other year you have 400,000. You could use those towards that capital project, but you wouldn't necessarily say that.
But you
they
would
come
show them
together.
as line items
Correct.
as the funding source came from 2013, 2014, or whatever the scenario was.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Further questions? Mrs. Raccio?
Has the statute passed to change it to 2%?
It did not pass, but it was recommended. We
They
were-
never voted, right? Isn't
No,
it? They didn't take
it was one
action
that
on
just
it,
kind
so,
of died.
yeah.
We were monitoring that one very closely.
I bet you were.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
Any other questions on either the financial forecast report through June of 2018 or the Munis report? Seeing none, we'll take consensus on those reports, starting with Mr. Ross.
Accept.
Yes.
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 And yes, thank you. Item C, the cafeteria financial report for June 2018, Mr. Barone and Mr. Mencher.
So we're going to start with C1, the comparison report. We're first just going to go over the income for June that we finished the school year, and I'll follow it up with our year-end figures, and then just a recap of our expenses. June was a surprise month, better than we anticipated. Our revenues were up $835 per day versus last year. The average meal per day versus last year were the same, but with 8,700 more meals, our reimbursements climbed $20,600. A good portion of that in June, our second healthy food check was given to us for $13,604, which helped us with our revenue for that month. We were all anticipating that anyway. It came a month later. Over by the federal breakfast on the bottom, towards the bottom right, our new revamped breakfast program showed great signs of additional revenue, showing a $5,000 more in revenue than the previous year. Our catering department, we're still building this program, and word is getting out from our administrators that food services has a quality product and is cost-effective. We're off to a good start this year, as August produced 3 new events that we never captured last August. Year-to-date, which on the bottom right under the days served, as you can see, we are down $451 a day in revenue and 134
I'm sorry, where
meals
are
a day.
we?
On
Yeah,
the
I'm
bottom
getting
of-
lost here.
Bottom of
Where's-
C1.
We're still on C1.
Right,
The
I got
year-to-date
that.
side.
It's the year-to-date
Okay,
side,
days served.
which is
Okay.
kind of on the bottom right
Yep.
under days served.
Okay, do that again for me, Dave,
Okay.
please.
So year-to-date, as you can see, the statistic shows that $451
got
a
it.
day in revenue and 134 meals a day.
Got
Our
it.
2 middle schools, a couple elementary schools, and a high school are our top priority for school year 18-19 to increase this participation. On the expense side, I thought we did a really good job managing our food cost. 34% of the year, 34% for the year is a good number to be at. The industry usually runs between 35 and 38% in most school districts. Our managers did an amazing job in June with their purchasing. They controlled their expenses, running out our warehouse inventory, utilizing old products on their shelves, and just watch what they spent. This produced a 21% food cost, our best month of the year. Payroll came in $21,000 under from the previous year, while we saw a $16K increase in unemployment. Total expenses were down $56,000, mainly due to less sales and less meals. Our deficit loss, as you can see, shows a $34,000 loss. We feel if we had 3 extra days, we would have reduced that deficit. That's the comparison report. Does anyone have any questions on any of those numbers that I went over? A lot of figures. So on the next report, C2, the 17-18, as you know, the C1 figures that we just went over, they roll into this spreadsheet that you have. April, May, and June showed a good trend for the better from being down 8% back in March. Serving days difference, as you can see, is 3 and plays a factor with being down 8% for the year. The rest of the numbers we went over in the C1 document. That's just the, gives us a nice meal variance percentage, and it breaks out, as you know, we discussed last year, to a per day variance percentage. So, are there any questions on that C2 cafeteria operations? Good. Let's move on. The next report is the participation log. As mentioned, June was a good month in the elementary schools. Not so good with the middle schools. Middle schools, they were down about 13 to 15% in revenue and meals. The high school was on target with just having 11 serving days due to the testings and being closed. The rest of the statistics we went over during the year, but once again, the elementary for June stands out, having just a really good month, which is nice to see to finish up the year on a strong note. Going forward, we talked briefly that would you guys like to see the C3 participation log that we just viewed for our operations meetings this year, like we talked briefly that maybe that's something that we could bypass. I'm gonna do it anyway just to see some of my numbers, but you guys could think about it or vote on it. It's up to you if you'd like to see that report going forward for this year.
Are there any remarks on that? Or do you want to wait till our next meeting and think about it for a month?
I'd like to see it at least until we've leveled off with the free and reduced lunch applications, because this will give us the percentages by school, and if there's a variance from last year to this year, we would be able to identify that. 'Cause what is it, October, the deadline for that?
Yes.
Everybody's grandfathered
It's-
until October,
So yeah,
and then.
towards the middle, and then it rolls into
makes
the end of
sense.
October.
Right, and
Correct.
then we kind of, there's that pocket when the students are like, oh, we're not getting that
Right, the
anymore.
first
Oh,
week of
mom and dad
November.
didn't do the paperwork, and then it's kind of that
Yeah,
catch-up.
no, that's a good idea. I like that idea.
So actually, would it go, for you, to your point, Tammy, it'd be to November, because that would give them that, October would be when they felt the pinch,
Yeah.
but then it would give them that extra time to get their paperwork in. You know, so I would actually say to your.
That's a good idea.
Actually go out that one extra month.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's your true number now for the year of what free and reduced looks like. Because anybody that's gonna do it is gonna do it by then. Unless you have a rogue family come or go,
Right,
but that's not
right.
gonna change
But
your
that's gonna happen all the
percentages,
time, right.
right, tremendously.
Yep, all right, thank you.
Right.
With the online applications, are we
The
seeing?
online applications, we're moving forward with that. We're waiting, we're scheduling a training day for Karen, my employee, and myself to go online with the software company. It's about 3 hours of training, and we're scheduling that now with the software company. We're trying to come up with a date, but it's gonna be
Okay, so that's
soon.
not in place yet?
No, it's not.
Okay. And when do we anticipate that being in place?
We could book a date within the next week, and we hope to have training, done before the end of the month.
Right, because that might be very helpful for some folks that
Absolutely.
might want to utilize that way of applying
Right.
for
No,
free and
we're looking
reduced.
forward to it because it's going to eliminate a lot paperwork on our end, on the administrative side, with handling hundreds and hundreds of applications.
Mrs. Purcell?
I just have a question. I didn't see it on here. Did you make any money on your camp in July? Was that a
Yes,
money?
we're going to go over, that's the
Oh.
next topic.
Okay,
Kathy,
sorry.
Or I'm sorry, Pat, we're going to go over that topic.
Okay.
Coming up. So let's move over to the marketing C4, if no one else, any other questions on the participation log. On the marketing end, just a few things. June was a little shorter month, but still kept me busy. On the elementary end, 2 schools were able to keep the field day that I reported back out in June in the cafeteria and not go out to the PTOs for lunch. I was able to generate an indoor barbecue menu for all of the elementaries, but just 2 of the schools chose to take it. The principals liked the idea, as field day is a busy, hectic day for the administrators. By keeping the 2 schools from getting outsourced to the PTOs, this generated about 350 extra meals with the 2 schools that got added onto our June number. So there was a lot of compliments because they got to spend more time with the students outside and do their field day than worry about food.
I would really urge you, when you have your administrator meeting, I think it's monthly, or whenever you guys all meet, you know, as administrative group, if you could get, because I see that as, I know you're working so hard, Dave, on the catering end, and I see so much potential there for revenue, and I know you're chipping away, but it's hard. If they could be spokespeople for you, even to say, and tuck it away, you know, for next spring, but, you know, if they had really great experiences, and it did afford them the opportunity to be, you know, more involved with the kids and the families and, you know, whatever's going on in their school, that could be a good endorsement for
No,
you.
I
That's just something to think about.
Thank you. We launched our first culinary video.
Excuse
and
me,
was
excuse me.
posted-
Mr. Ross has a question.
Yeah, do you track how often they use an outside caterer in the cafeteria?
I personally don't. No, that's not a statistic that comes from my area. I would be.
Because I'm just curious if we knew if it was a lot more or a lot less outside catering, and what are we doing to get after that?
What I would recommend, and I think it's important, Ms. Raccio just mentioned it across, is the fact that personally I think it's not PTAC, it's really PTO, because that's who really makes these decisions. And sometimes our PTO, PTAC are combined, which is good. I would say that what we could do when we have an elementary principals meeting this week, we could start planting the seed with the elementary principals to invite Dave again to his PTOs, their PTO / PTAC meetings, to talk a little bit about it and you know, share the information. And to Ray's point, we could also talk to our administrators about, can they give us a guesstimate as to how many times for what events do they go outside? We had done that in the past. I think the product has changed to a better quality in some areas. I think people will be more willing to participate. So we can get that and share that with Dave, so then he could try to potentially target those opportunities.
Because I know like the football teams have their pasta parties at the cafeteria rather than the homes, because they can't fit the students in the
Correct.
home. And I know we're not getting that.
Yeah, no, and Dave did get a few of the teams last year. He did get, I think you got basketball at
I got 3
Sheehan.
extra park.
You got a couple of things at Lyman Hall.
Because that's big. That's big.
Yeah.
A lot of that's word of mouth, you know. I just think you have to be patient, because that's such a departure from where we were.
Correct.
And you know, it just takes time sometimes for that
But to
stuff.
elaborate, Ray, I was able to meet with Chris Daly last month, and we came up with a document for reduced pasta events for all athletic coaches, and he was able to bring that up on his agenda for the coaches, and we also did it at Lyman. So we're off to a good start getting out the document to the coaches. So we should hopefully see some business this season on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We launched our first culinary video and was posted to our webpage back in June. Thanks go out to Evan and IT. Evan put a lot of work in. I obviously did it with him, but there was a lot of editing. We had to get some photo release stuff checked, and then we were able to get the authorization from the high schools, from the front office. And so if you guys haven't seen that, you can check it out. It's a fun video. We had fun with it, and it just shows you what we could do and what we're currently doing on the lunch lines. I did a guest reader finally at Parker Farms. It was canceled probably 2 months in a row, but I finally got to go out to Parker and do a Dr. Seuss reading, so I enjoy, that's the fun part of my job. And then in the middle school, high school marketing, we reapplied for the whole grain waiver with the state back at the end of June, and was able, And just recently, last week, the state finally got back to me, and they did approve us for the whole year. Probably one more time with just our breads and rolls. So we're excited about that. Like I told Dominic, you know, he says, "What do you think is going to happen?" And I said, "I don't think we're going to get it." And she gave it to us. So we're psyched about that. We're going to communicate that out to the students and the parents too. Customer service log, no incidents for the month of June. Any questions on the marketing? As you guys know, I report out quite a bit on what I do each and every month, and all these things try to drive sales, and we're really trying to get there. We're in the right direction. Patty mentioned about, you know, what about work camps? So work camps are our next thing on our schedule, and my staff, 11 people, were called to work during that week, 7 days, and they worked more than their scheduled normal hours. The organization guaranteed us 360 campers per meal. So we did 360 meals times 3. We did 1,080 meals a day for 7 days. The good thing about that was the lunch service was out in the community. So they wanted groceries to make sandwiches, cold cuts, peanut butter and jelly, fruits. Everything was on the side, but everything was packed in coolers. So it gave a little relief to my staff that they didn't have to do a hot lunch, and it was so hot anyway. So all in all, great week. Lots of compliments from their directors to my staff. My staff was elated about working. They actually had a good time. It was a large catering event, which they're not used to. And I saw a lot of smiles, a lot of faces, and they were able to work for 7 days and get some extra income, so it was nice to see. So the work camp invoice generated a $31,000 invoice. And we were able to net profit $10,600 to start the school year off this summer. So we're elated. I'm just very excited. And on a final note, we know our main goal for the school year is to increase meals and participation. That's exactly what it comes out to, is drive meals and get more kids through that register. And we're working on the new card scan with Karen's crew and with the new barcodes. And that's in the process of getting made now, and that is going to speed up lunch lines and trigger more parents to let their child get on that lunch line. And we're excited about that. Online applications we talked about is another module that we're excited about. These are all new programs that are going to eventually increase this program, and we're excited.
Do we know, is it a possibility that next summer we'll have the same opportunity, or do they rotate? Yeah, that's
The
what I
work camps?
thought. Yeah.
Work camps told me that we might be slotted for every other year.
There you go.
So I networked with our Rhode Island people, and they got it every other year for,
Okay.
you know,
That'd be great.
Yes.
I appreciate that.
So,
And our community at large benefited clearly for the work they did.
yeah.
Mm.
Does anyone have any questions?
You indicated that you're working on the new card scan. Do you have any idea when that might be ready?
It could be a Karen question.
Sure, we're actually, the photo companies are designing the new cards, which should be a fairly quick process, and photos are in process of being taken this month, I believe. So as soon as the photos are done, they told me about 2 to 3 weeks after, the cards will come, and they were able to give us samples with the barcodes, and we did test those, and they worked fine, so. that's about it.
Okay. Mr. Ross?
Yeah, just in regard to the customer service incidents, without being specific, I'm at a loss, what happens there?
Those create through whether there's a foreign object in someone's meal, a hair, they report it to the cafeteria manager. Any type of food incident that is brought to our manager's attention, and then we fill out the proper report, and then I get a copy of it, and then I follow up with either the parent or the principal, and it could be a safety incident. you know, one of my employees had a laceration on her hand, or she slipped, or those are incidents that we're tracking on my end and also on the student end.
Because I'm amazed at how few there are. Compliments to you on that, you know.
We did improve. I noticed that.
Oh,
I didn't want to report that out, but thank you for bringing that up. We started out with a few too many incidents, and then towards the, before the half of the year, we pretty much cut it to zero.
Down to
or
zero,
one.
yeah.
It's compliments to my staff, really being attentive to safety and food handling. And
Any other remarks on items C1 through C4? Seeing none, we'll take consensus, starting with Mr. Ross.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
And yes. We come to the portion of our agenda, item 6, public comment. Do we have any public comment this evening?
Vast audience.
Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.